Hi everyone, the Partial Prophet here. Thanks for tuning in. So I wanted to remind you that we know in part and we prophesy in part. And so when Messiah comes, we will see fully. Um, and so that's really cool when you think about this year being 2020, because I really think we're going to be seeing the Messiah soon, and that we will be seeing more fully when the Messiah comes. And so my video today is the big question is the Messiah coming soon? And so I'd like to propose that I really do think he is coming soon, and I'll tell you why, and then you can, um, think about it and see if you think, um, you see the same thing. Okay, so in some of my previous videos, I had talked about the three supermoons, the full supermoons, um, that happened at the beginning of 2019. Um, and so what we had three supermoons, one in January, one in February, one in March. And I proposed in my videos that the January supermoon was connecting us to October, the February supermoon was connecting us to November, and the March supermoon was connecting us to December. And so then what that was, so the pattern that we saw in 2019 was we had 3 months of supermoons, um, followed by 6 months, and then it finished with 3 months. And then, so now here we are in 2020, and I kind of missed that it was like 3.5 months. I was trying to get everything all done in 3 months, but I'm thinking what the deal might be is 3.5 months. Well, I mean, it's at least 3.5 months because so far we're in January and nothing has happened yet, or the Messiah hasn't come yet. I mean, a lot has happened, but we haven't seen the Messiah yet. Um, um, and so let's review just really quickly. So in January we had the super blood wolf moon eclipse. And so I proposed in my videos that the wolf, or the raven, which we read about in Genesis, is Erdogan, the guy who's in charge of Turkey, the country of Turkey. And so this connected to the month of October. So the January supermoon connected to the month of October. I think it connects to Trump. Um, and so then let me read the verses in Genesis. So this is in Genesis 8, 6-7. And it says, Then it came about at the end of 40 days that Noah opened the window of the ark which he had made, and he sent out a raven, and it flew here and there until the water was dried up from the earth. Okay, so what we saw, just really quickly, the events in October, because I covered this more in a previous video. On October 1st, it was the 40th week after Christmas. In Genesis 8:5, it talks about the 10th month, the first day, the tops of the mountains being visible. And so we see kind of this picture of like a birthing, the top of the mountains visible. Like seeing the head of the baby. Um, um, so that's what I get out of that verse. So it's, kind of like we're seeing a birth, the start of the birth process. And so then on October 6th, President Trump said he will remove the troops from Syria. And then October 7th, he did remove the troops from Syria. And so this was all like kind of to appease Erdogan, and to meet Erdogan's desires. And so then on October 9th, it was terrible. On Yom Kippur, there was Turkish airstrikes in northern Syria. The Kurds ended up being killed, by the Turkish forces. So it was terrible. And so really kind of what we saw in the month of October was Trump going rogue, like Trump really acting like Obama, because he was really favoring Israel's enemies, in the month of October. And so it was bad. And then so on October 21st, was a very significant date. That was when Israel had asked, President Trump to keep some troops in Syria because they saw, that Turkey was going to get closer to Israel, closer to their border. If the Americans left Syria, and President Trump said he will not help America militarily, So that was where he was like Vashti on day 7, where he would not bring his beauty, the beauty of America, where, we're really strong militarily in this country, but he wouldn't bring it to help Israel. So that would happen on the 7th day. And then also on that day, really interesting, Netanyahu's his birthday, he turned 70, and he couldn't form a government. So that was very interesting. And so really what Trump did is now we got this Turkey guy. He's flying here and there. He's really kind of making a mess of the Middle East. Like, one of the things he's doing, he's getting in the way of Israel. Israel's trying to sell natural gas, and he's kind of like frustrating that process. So he's just going here and there in the Middle East making problems. And then, okay, so let's move on to February. So that supermoon was called the super snow moon, the storm moon, and I connected that to Messiah. So what I think maybe happened in November is judgment began, the Messiah was anointed. I do think, at the end of 40 days, in October, it was the 40th week after Christmas. I think it's possible that kind of in a way, that maybe that started the birthing process, or, it was kind of a picture of like Moses being born, and then Moses was hid for 3 months. So that's what I kind of think happened. But I think what we saw in November is what happened on November 21st is Netanyahu was indicted. And so what I really think was 3 days later on November 24th was when the Messiah was anointed, because that was the 70th year, the 70th week, and the 70th day of the nation of Israel being a nation. And God talks about in Daniel 9 about the 70 years putting an end to sin, and a bunch of other stuff. And so I'm kind of wondering if that's what happened on the 24th. And so then what else? Okay, so let me read the Genesis verses first that connect to the month of November. And it says, "Then he sent out a dove from him to see if the water was abated from the face of the land. But the dove found no resting place for the sole of her foot, so she returned to him into the ark, for the water was on the surface of all the earth. Then he put out his hand and took her and brought her into the ark to himself." So we see this picture of she returned to him into the ark. So I see kind of this connection to the story of Joseph, where the two people join him in jail. And so I think this was the first person that joined Jesus in jail, or Joseph, who's a messianic figure, who's Jesus. And that was, Netanyahu, because he got indicted. And then I kind of think too, like, where it says the dove found no resting place for the sole of her foot. I think that could have been Trump. Like, he actually got a lot of flack from all the stuff that he did with Erdogan and in Syria, removing the troops. And so, so it says, so she returned to him into the ark. And so I see that was when Trump decided to do another nice thing to Israel, because he always got kudos when he did nice things for Israel. So on November 18th was when Pompeo made an announcement about the West Bank. Also, what happened this month was November 13th, President Trump made a deal with Erdogan. That was the day his impeachment begins. Definitely a highly prophetic date. I talked about that in one of my previous videos. And then the day after the announcement about the West Bank, there was 4 rockets from Syria, which were probably from Iran. And then that was the same day that Netanyahu approved the West Bank bill in Israel. And so I think that was a highly significant prophetic date, kind of like the war with Iran started. And then that would be the connection to the super snow moon. And so I really think judgment started on that day. And so we saw a lot of winter storms at the end of November in America. Um, so definitely an interesting month. Okay, so then in December, um, was okay. So that's connected to the March supermoon, which was the full worm moon, and then it's I didn't talk about this in my previous videos, but I noticed that it was also called the Lenten moon, and I thought that was really significant because it was like the season of Lent started. What we saw in December was the start of Trump's impeachment process. And so there's this whole connection to with Trump's impeachment to Lent and to Easter. And so definitely very interesting. So let me read the verses from Genesis. Genesis 8:10-11. So he waited yet another 7 days, and again he sent out the dove from the ark. The dove came to him toward evening, and behold, in her beak was a freshly picked olive leaf. So no one knew that the water was abated from the earth. So I think the freshly picked olive leaf is Trump, you know, because of his impeachment. And so that happened on December 18th. I thought that was significant because it was 18, which is 666. And so that was the President Trump impeachment vote in the House. What was very interesting was on that day, there was a 5.5 magnitude earthquake on Easter Island. And then, so what we saw was on December 21st was when winter began. I thought that was really significant because it was Kislev 23. And what happened on this date of Kislev was that was when Obama got the Nobel Prize in 2009. And then years later when he was president, like this was near the end of his presidency, there's the whole Obama thing with UN 2334. And so with Kislev 23, like I really think that the numbers of the Antichrist are 13, 23, and then we see with the UN 2334, like maybe the number 34 too. So what was interesting is that this was day 1334. Now what I have to tell you about the there's 1260 days and 1290 days and 1335 days is what's mentioned in the Bible. And really the thing is that there's a bunch of different dates where you could start the counting of the 1260 days and the 1290 days. You know, like because what I really think is we wanted to start counting the days on when Trump either became okay, let me see, I'm trying to find in my notes when he either became the let's see, okay, we could start counting from June 16th, 2015. That was when Trump announced that he'd be running for president. Or we could start counting from May 4th, 2016 was when he became the presumptive nominee. What's interesting is that on April 26th of 2016, Trump declared that he was the nominee from Trump Tower. So that was kind of interesting. And then on July 19th, 2016 was when he became the official nominee. So I have a bunch of different dates that I'm sort of doing the 1260, 1290, 1335 connection to. And so we saw 1334 end up on December 21st, and then on December 22nd, which was the start of Hanukkah, we have a day 1335. So what's really interesting about this Hanukkah is there's two different 1335s that end up during this time frame of Hanukkah. And what we see in Daniel, I think it's in Daniel 12, where it says, how blessed, it's Daniel 12:12, how blessed is he who keeps waiting and attains to the 1335 days. And we also saw in Haggai where he talks about the 24th of the 9th month. And, you know, first of all, he says, you know, consider, you know, how I smote you in every work of your hands. And then consider from the 24th of the 9th month, from the day that the temple of the Lord was founded. and that how everything is unclean. But then he says, yet from this day on, I will bless. And so I really think this Hanukkah was a significant Hanukkah because of the 1335. And so we'll kind of get into a little bit more of that. So back in December, okay, let's see. Okay, so then on December 25th was Christmas, was on the third day of Hanukkah, which I thought was really significant. What was very interesting on that day was there was a missile shot at Israel, and Netanyahu was escorted into a bomb shelter. There was also a solar eclipse where, like, it happened on the 26th, but I think if you do the time, it was really like the 25th New York time. So I thought that was kind of interesting. And then on December 27th was, okay, so that was when there was rockets from Iran, killed an American contractor in Iraq. So then on December, so this is kind of the start of America, kind of having problems with Iran. I mean, it's kind of interesting because it was kind of like we see these pattern of things happening in Israel first, so like the previous month on the 19th, it was like the war with Iran and Israel started. And then now we see America kind of getting into the mix with Iran. And then, first we saw Netanyahu indicted, and then now we see Trump being impeached. So the patterns are being repeated between the two countries, just kind of delayed in America. And then, so then on December 29th, we had the U.S. airstrikes against Iran-backed militias in Iraq and Syria. December 30th was the 8th day of Hanukkah. That was the other day, 1335. And then December 31st was the storming of the U.S. Embassy by pro-Iranian militia. Definitely very interesting. And so what's interesting is if you take some of the March dates, you could kind of see a connection. So what's interesting is that on March 18th, that was when Iran called for a curse on Israel, the United States, and Saudi Arabia. And so it's interesting that that is connected to Trump's impeachment on December 18th. And then on March 20th, so we saw like the number 13 connections in March. It was the 13th month after Billy Graham died. Baron Trump turned 13 on Adar 13. It was Purim on the 21st of March. And then Trump said it was time to recognize the Golan. That was also the date of Moses's Brit. And then that was the day of the supermoon. So definitely a highly significant prophetic date. And so I connect these 13s to, like I said, I think that what we had was Trump being impeached. And then so like 3 days later, we had Obama was like anointed, in quotes, on December 21st when winter started. And then so then let's see, March 22nd was Shushan Purim, which connects to the start of Hanukkah. On March 25th, Trump signed, he signed the thing connected to the Golan with Netanyahu in the White House. That is connected to Christmas Day, third day of Hanukkah, connected to Netanyahu being escorted into the bomb shelter. Let's see. On March 25th, there was a rocket from Gaza that injured 7. So that connects to that rocket, the missile at Israel on December 25th. And then on March 31st, the Arab League protested the Golan decision, and that was connected to the storming of the U.S. Embassy by pro-Iranian militias. So see these connections, see how these things connect. It's just fascinating. Okay. And so then I wanted to talk about the Christmas connections because it's been kind of interesting to watch what's been going on with Christmas throughout the years. It started out with in 2012, Obama said for his second term he was going to win the war on Christmas, whatever that means. And then we had in 2015, we had the Pope saying, "This is your last Christmas." We had the Queen saying in the same year, "This is your last Christmas." Like sort of these self-anointed prophets saying things. What happened was in 2016, George Michael, the singer George Michael, died, and he was 53 and a half years old. And what was interesting is that he had a song called Last Christmas, the singer of Last Christmas. So I think there's a whole kind of pattern connected to George Michael dying. Like we see the 3.5 in his, okay, let me tell you some of the connections about George Michael. First of all, we see the 3.5, so like the 3.5 months. And then, or the times and half a time. And then his name is fascinating. Okay, so look at George Michael. So George is the first name of our first president. And, and so that's his first name. And then Michael connects to the Michael messianic figure that Daniel sees in the book of Daniel. So it's kind of like we're seeing the first president and then of America, and then like the name of the Messiah. So like the beginning and the end in that name. And then so he sings about the last Christmas, and so I think it was God saying we want to pay attention to the last Christmas. And that was interesting because that was the year after the Pope said, "This is your last Christmas." Obviously, the Pope was wrong, but just definitely interesting. And then it was sad because in 2016 there was a Berlin Christmas attack, and then Chile had a 7.7 earthquake on that day. But the other things that happened that week with George Michael, so he died, and then a couple days later we had Carrie Fisher died, and then the next day, and so Carrie Fisher is the star of Star Wars, and then the next day was Debbie Reynolds died. So I definitely see some prophetic connections. Debbie Reynolds dies at 84, and that's connected to the prophet in the temple when Jesus's parents take Jesus to the temple. There's a lady who was widowed, and she was 84, and so there's definitely a connection there. And then Star Wars, I think, definitely could be a picture of war starting. So anyways, so that's a pattern that I see happening. So let me get my notes here because I want to tell you the exact dates here. Because what could happen is that, so I was wondering, like, for this week, like, the pattern maybe that we could see is on the 21st is we have Trump's impeachment trial. And so kind of like you could say that was the day that George Michael died. And then you would have, so let's say the 21st is connected to December 25th. And then we had, let's see, then Carrie Fisher died on the 27th. Okay, so that would be 2 days later. So that would be the 23rd. So like, are we going to see war on January 23rd? And then on the 24th was when Debbie Reynolds died. Or actually she died on the 28th, but that would be connected to January 24th. And so then are we going to see the Messiah showed up because Debbie Reynolds sang Singing in the Rain. And then she also, like was the unsinkable Molly Brown, she was in that play. Um, so I see that possible connection there with George Michael. But we'll have to see what happens to see what pattern we're seeing. But I definitely think this 3.5 pattern is significant. Okay, so then in 2017, we had ISIS had videos showing attacks on Christmas. Like, people really want to pick on Christmas a lot. In 2019, North Korea, last year, at the end of the last year, North Korea wanted to give us a Christmas present on Christmas, and not a good one. And then the Democrats, very interesting. The Democrats wanted to impeach Trump by Christmas. Why was that important? That is kind of interesting that they picked that date. I mean, they were planning to go on a break, but it was just really interesting that that's what they said. And then we had the IDF chief of staff on this last Christmas saying Israel was fighting Iran alone. And so what else is kind of interesting is that at the end of December, there's been at least a couple years where Israel talks about being alone. So in 2016, the same year that George Michael died, the chief rabbi had said, the U.S. has forsaken us. And that was connected to Obama signing he didn't sign it. He didn't vote at all for the UN 2334. And so, he didn't veto it or object to it. And so then Israel was feeling alone. And then in 2018, on the 26th of December, Netanyahu said Israel has to go alone in Syria. And then we had this past year, 2019, where the IDF chief of staff says Israel is fighting Iran alone. So kind of interesting that, the last month of December, Israel's always kind of feeling alone. Okay, so then I want to make sure that you guys understand the Trump 666. Okay, so quick review. It's been a while since I talked about it. Well, not really. I'm always talking about it, but I wanted it all on one page so you'd understand why I connect 666 to Trump. So on December 6, 2017, which was also Kislev 18 on the Hebrew calendar, President Trump announced that he would move the embassy to Jerusalem. Okay, so with the date 12/6, we see 666 there. And then with the date 18, we see 666. Okay, and then on March 21st, 2019, which was the second of Adar, or the second Adar, day 14, which was Purim, that was when President Trump said it is time to recognize the Golan. Okay, so this one you have to do some calculating. So that was 321,2019. If you add that all together, you get 612. So 2019 adds up to 12, and then 321 adds up to 6, and then you get 666. Or if you want to do it this way, you could say it was actually March 25th, 2019, which was the second Adar 18, where President Trump signed the Golan at the White House with Netanyahu, because then you could get a 666 there from the 18. So, just however you want to look at that. And then on November 18th in 2019, which was Chesvan 20, that was when Pompeo made the announcement about the West Bank. So this is what I believe are the 3 6s of Trump. November 18th, you get the 666 there. But then I want to talk about, I think what we have is we see that number 62 talked about in Daniel 9. And so what I believe, because the way the 62 is written in the Hebrew, it's 62 weeks. And so what I think it connects to is you have the 666 and then you have 2 more weeks, quote unquote. And so what I think is that we have Trump 666, and then what I think he has is two abominations that cause desolation. And so what I'd like to propose is that his two AODs are, number one is the stuff that President Trump did connected to Turkey. Okay, and so that was on October 6th when he said he'd remove the troops from Syria, and then on November 13th when he made a deal with Erdogan. Okay, saying we're going to do billions of dollars of business with Erdogan. And then I think his second AOD, which is a really highly significant one, is that was happened on January 2nd, 2020. Well, okay, so that was when the United States killed Soleimani, who's the Iran military leader. And so I don't think it's so much that we killed him that is bad. I think it's more like because on the next day, January 3rd, which was Tevet 6 on the Hebrew calendar, so you see that 6 there, that is when Trump said, "We took action last night to stop a war. We did not take action to start a war," Trump said Friday afternoon from his Mar-a-Lago resort in Florida. Okay, so what we're seeing is this peace and safety connection. And so it's not so much like Soleimani, he was a terrorist, so the fact that he got killed, that's great. Okay, it's not so much that, it's that Trump doesn't want to like totally jump in and get his feet wet in this war. And so don't mess with Iran if you're not going to follow it through, is what I think. Because we're just going to get Israel killed is basically what's going to happen because, really the United States needs to be using its military to help Israel with Iran because Iran is very dangerous. And what we've seen with Trump through the years is that, he tends to have a tendency to want to avoid war, so he has kind of that left thinking of the, why should we go to war? Kind of a connection to, who is it? The brothers, the two sons of, here, I'll get up my Bible. The two sons of Adam and Eve. So let's see here. Cain and Abel. Okay, so what we see is that Abel kills his brother, and so then the Lord comes to Abel and says, or the Lord comes to Cain and says, "Where is Abel, your brother?" And he says, "I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper?" And then the Lord says, "What have you done? The voice of your brother's blood is crying to me from the ground." And so I believe this is a prophecy that we're going to be seeing fulfilled because I think Trump is going to get Israel killed. Jesus is going to come back and ask Trump, "Where's your brother? Where's Israel?" And he's going to say, "Well, why are you asking me? Am I my brother's keeper?" Because I don't think he's aware of the fact that we are his brother's keeper, that we are responsible for blessing Israel. That those who bless Israel will be blessed, and those who curse Israel will be cursed. So that's what I think about that. Okay, so these are the two abominations that are going to cause desolations. Okay, and so I wanted to connect this to the statue in Daniel. So I switched around my statue just a smidgen because I wanted to put Trump, I thought it was kind of interesting to put Trump on the other side, on the other leg, because then there's a connection to Bill Clinton because Bill Clinton was the only other president in America that's been impeached. I think we almost had Nixon being impeached, but he ended up resigning before he got impeached. So I thought that was kind of an interesting connection. So, excuse me. let's see. Okay, so let me read. Okay, so what I believe is that this statue is, we've been living out the prophecy of this statue where the head of gold is connected to Netanyahu, because I believe gold is connected to the Jewish people, silver is connected to the Christians in America. It starts with Reagan, and Reagan had a a heart for Israel, so he's connected to the heart of the statue. The two bushes are the silver arms. And then we have Obama, who's connected to, I think it's brass or bronze or something, that's the next metal. And so I think Bill Clinton, Obama, and Hillary, you have the kind of the belly of the beast is bronze, and then the two thighs of the statue are bronze or brass or whatever. And then we have the legs of iron. And so I have put, I think Trump and John Kerry are the legs of iron, because I think there's a connection with, so John Kerry was the one who worked on the Iran deal. And then what we've seen now is that we have Trump, has done this Turkey deal, so what we have is these two legs of iron, that are gonna create problems for Israel, big time. And okay, so let's see. I wanted to read some of these verses that kind of talk about, okay, that connect to the statue. Okay, so Daniel 12, 5-7, it says, Then I, Daniel, looked, and behold, two others were standing, one on this bank of the river, and the other on that bank of the river. And one said to the man dressed in linen, who was above the waters of the river, How long will it be until the end of these wonders? I heard the man dressed in linen, who was above the waters of the river, as he raised his right hand and his left toward heaven, and he swore by him who lives forever, that it would be for a time, times, and half a time. And as soon as they finished shattering the power of the holy people, all these events would be completed. So we see this picture of one person is on one bank of the river and the other's on the other bank of the river. There's also a connection to, so we would have, maybe Trump on one bank and John Kerry on the other bank. I kind of think it's Trump on one side and then Obama on the other side, but John Kerry, they're all kind of connected. I think there's 4 people connected to Obama. Obama, Hillary, and John. I'm not sure if Bill's in that picture. We'll see what happens in the last days. Maybe the Pope is the 4th. Because Obama, had a big day on Yom Kippur with the Pope. And so then, this is also connected. I just read today about Moses, where God tells Moses to go meet Pharaoh on the bank of the river. And so the same picture where it's Moses is on one side and Pharaoh's on the other side. And so I think that could be a picture of the month of October. And so what we saw is that, Moses, or Trump, who was like Moses, going to the bank of the river, just like Obama, being like Obama. And then, okay, so see, and so let's talk about this. The fact that they were standing on the river. Okay, so this on the bank of the river. So I think this connects to Exodus 3, 2-5. Okay, so this is Moses in the burning bush. The angel of the Lord appeared to him in a blazing fire from the midst of a bush. And he looked, and behold, the bush was burning with fire, yet the bush was not consumed. So Moses said, I must turn aside now and see this marvelous sight, why the bush is not burned up. When the Lord saw that he turned aside to look, God called to him from the midst of the bush, and he said, Moses, Moses. And he said, Here I am. Then he said, Do not come here. Remove your sandals from your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground. Okay, so what I think is we have these people that have been standing on um, the bank, the holy ground of Israel, basically, and causing problems for Israel, doing stuff with their power to create problems for Israel. And so then what we see is the Lord, the angel of the Lord, who's a messianic figure, comes and says, remove your sandals. And so we see there's a lot of connection to feet. We see Jesus like washing the feet of the disciples. And so, like, if you look at the statue, you could see like Jesus coming and washing the feet of the statue, you know, um, but also like this concept of, the sandals being removed could be a picture of the leadership being removed. We see in the book of Ruth that she uncovers the feet of um, what's the guy's name in that book? The messianic figure in the book of Ruth, she uncovers his feet. And then there's a whole connection with Esau and Jacob, where Jacob is holding on to Esau's foot. Um, which also could be a picture of like Jacob walking like Esau. So we see Trump, like walking like Obama, and so then he has to remove his sandals because it's just not good. Don't walk like Obama. Don't walk like the Egyptian. Okay. Okay, so then let's see what's going on. Oh, so I wanted to talk about, I was wondering, let's see, is this where I am? Okay. So I was wondering if with Hanukkah, I told you that I thought this was a special Hanukkah because of 1335, because of Christmas being on the third day. But I was wondering if what we were going to be seeing is the start of multiple Hanukkah weeks on Hanukkah. And so here I did calculating for you. So Hanukkah 1 was the usual Hanukkah. That was December 23rd to December 30th with Christmas on day 3. The second Hanukkah would be December 31st to January 7th with the Orthodox Christmas landing on day 8 of that week. The third Hanukkah would be January 8th to January 15th. What we saw in that was Trump's impeachment ceremony. I put that in quotes because that was when Nancy Pelosi was being all ceremonial, signing with multiple pens, and then they had the big parade from the House to the Senate with the impeachment documents. So that happened on January 15th. And then Hanukkah number 4 would be January 16th to the January 23rd, with the Armenian Christmas Eve on day 3, and I'll talk about that in a bit. So what we see is that January 15th was like a 24th day of Hanukkah. What we saw, I talk about this in another slide too, is like the start of Sukkot in the 7th month. I'll talk about why January also ends up being the 7th month. But it was like we're seeing a Sukkot from January 15th to the 21st. So then we have January 15, 3 days later was the Armenian Christmas Eve in Jerusalem, which is, if you don't know, that's the last Christmas that anyone celebrates, and it happens in Jerusalem, which is really interesting. I have a slide for that, so we'll talk about that. And then January 21st would be a day 7, the 7th day of the Sukkot in the 7th month. Kind of like a Gentile Sukkot. And then that January 21st, it's interesting. So that's today when I'm making this video. It's also Tevet 24. So I thought today was a very significant day because we were seeing both the 24 and the 21 numbers showing up today. And then what we're going to see is January 23rd is like the 8th day of the 4th Hanukkah. So then January 24th is the start of the 5th Hanukkah. And so we're seeing another 24 on January 24th. And the reason why those numbers are significant is we got Daniel that talks about 3 weeks, 21 days, and the 24th day, he sees a messianic figure. The the 21 days, he talks about mourning for 3 weeks, which I think the 3 weeks could connect to the 666 of Trump. And then we see the messianic figure, which I think is Gabriel in that chapter. He says the Prince of Persia, which if you make the Christians the Persians, you got the Medo-Persians. And so I think, and so Cyrus is the Persian king. You got Darius the Mede. He gets his power after 62, or he comes to power after 62. That's all in Daniel. And so what I think is that the Persians are a picture of the Christians, and the Medes are a picture of the Jewish people. I mean, besides the usual, because obviously Persians do connect to the real country of Iran. But symbolically, I think there's also a symbolic connection. So why did I start saying that? Oh, so we have the messianic figure Gabriel talking about the Prince of Persia, like kind of holding him back for 21 days. So kind of interesting. Okay, so then moving on, we got April. Okay, so we got the month of April. There wasn't a supermoon in April, there was just a full moon, and they called it the pink moon, the sprouting grass moon, the egg moon, the fish moon, and that happened on the 19th. So I didn't notice this until I started dabbling into April. So what we kind of see is this pattern, because 19 connects to gold. Okay, I think gold connects to the Messiah. It also connects to the Jewish people. And so what we see is like this pattern of like Trump and the Messiah and the Antichrist, and then moving back into, for January, the Messiah. Or you could say like we got Erdogan in October, a picture of the Messiah in February, the picture of the Antichrist in March, and then back to the Messiah in April, or October, November, December, and January. So I thought that was kind of interesting, seeing kind of this 19 showing up again. And then, so I think the month of January, this is the verse. It says, "Then he waited yet another 7 days and sent out the dove, but she did not return to him again." So I think that could be a picture of Trump. I think we could be seeing the end of his term in the month of January. Okay, so I took the name of the April full moon, the egg moon. I thought would be a connection to like a birthing. And so if I'm seeing things correctly, we may see the Messiah born, quote unquote, in January, his birth in January. And so connections from, okay, so January was a very busy month. Okay. A lot has happened this month. Okay, so let's go over really quickly everything that happened at the beginning of the month. Okay, so January 1st was the 3 years after Trump's Make America Great Again thing. And then, or like his, I think that might have been his New Year's resolution, that he was going to make America great again. Okay, we saw the second day of protest at the U.S. Embassy in Iraq on January 1st. Trump says on January 1st, "I like peace," on January 1st. In January 2nd, that was when the U.S. killed this is when they killed Soleimani, which we already talked about. Same day, Israel was working on their gas pipeline deal. But what was interesting is that someone got rescued from the Grand Canyon on January 2nd. On January 3rd, after being in the Grand Canyon for 3 weeks, I think. So that was kind of interesting, significant. What was interesting was on January 3rd was when we saw what I consider I talked about this in the earlier slide, the second of Trump's 62 or AODs or whatever. And then also what happened on that day was Netanyahu praised Trump for killing Soleimani. Oh, some things got deleted. Sorry about that. Okay, so on January 4th, Israel, okay, so what we saw from Israel is they believe the chances are low that Iran will respond by attacking Israel. Okay, very naive. Okay. And then that was the day too that Trump was talking about the 52 Iranian sites that he was going to attack to connect to. Okay, this is very interesting because this connected to the 52 Iranian hostages. Okay, so what I like about this is that it's reminding us about Reagan. Because if you remember about Reagan, before Reagan came into power, we had Iran had took 52 Americans hostage. Um, and and that would be under Carter's administration. And so what happened was when Reagan became president, like the actual day of his inauguration, they let him go because they were afraid of Reagan. They did not want to go. They knew probably that Carter was kind of wishy-washy and wouldn't go to war with them, but they weren't too sure about Reagan. So it's kind of interesting that we're kind of being reminded of Reagan because, he's the first king on that statue, so I thought that was really interesting. And then on January 6th, that was when Berkowitz was in Israel to discuss the peace plan, Trump's peace plan. That happened on the 6th, like in Americans' time. It might have been January 7th, in Israel, but I think it was January 6th in America when that happened. What was interesting too is that is the date of Three Kings Day. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Because we had Berkowitz was talking to both, it's very interesting, talking to both Netanyahu and Gantz about this peace plan. Because they don't know who's going to win in Israel. So they got to cover everybody. So it's like we had three guys there. So kind of interesting. And then on January 7th was the funeral for Iran's Soleimani. And then this exact same day, Iran dropped missiles on 2 U.S. bases in Iraq. That was when the Ukrainian plane got shot down, which is very sad. What's interesting is that all happened on 3 months after 10/7, which was, 3 months to the day after Trump removed the troops from Syria. And then what was interesting too is January 7th is the Orthodox Christmas. And then it was also the date of it's also the 10th of Tebet on the Hebrew calendar, which is the anniversary. It's a fast day for the Jewish people because that was when the Babylonians invaded Israel. And so I just thought that was interesting that we saw, basically kind of like we were starting war with Iran on that day. So definitely interesting. And then, what was interesting was, so this is very interesting, is that on January 8th, we had Trump, like he said, Iran appears to be standing down. So I put safety there. So it was kind of like we saw Trump talking about, I like peace. And then he's saying, oh no, we're safe. Iran's like, they got it out of their system. They, just dropped a few missiles on these bases. And now they're not mad at us anymore for killing Soleimani. Okay, if only it was that simple. So definitely kind of interesting. And then on January 9th, the House voted to limit Trump with the war on Iran. So, we definitely see the Democrats don't want to go to war, and there is, if you wonder why I focus on that, let me see where I wrote this down. There is a psalm that talks about, Okay, now I have this written down here somewhere. It's talking about, let's find it. Can't find it right now. Okay, one of the Psalms is talking about, Ephraim and how, like, it's a really good psalm. I wish I could find it. How they, oh, right here I found it. Praise the Lord. Okay. Okay, so it is Psalm 77 verse 9. It talks about, let's see, I could actually open my Bible and read this to you. Psalm 77, which 77 and 78 are like my favorite psalms here. So 77, it's talking about, let's see here. Oh, good thing I looked it up. Okay, so it's Psalm 78 that it's talking about Ephraim. Okay, so Psalm 78:9, it says the sons of Ephraim. So the sons of Ephraim would be the Christians. Okay, the sons of Ephraim were archers equipped with bows, yet they turned back in the day of battle. They did not keep the covenant of God and refused to walk in his law. They forgot his deeds and his miracles that he had shown them. So that is one of God's biggest complaint against America is they turned back on the day of battle. We should have been standing with Israel fighting against Iran, but we turned back. Okay, so peace and safety. So then sudden destruction. 1 Thessalonians. Okay, so January 9th. Okay, so I already talked about that. January 10th, we saw another full wolf moon eclipse. What was interesting on that day was we saw Boeing. They talked about Boeing 737 MAX emails coming out talking about, they just were, it was bad what they did with the Boeing 737 MAX. And so I thought that was interesting. We see a lot with the 737s. We've been hearing a lot about the 737 MAXs, because they took them out of service. Definitely kind of interesting. And then, like with airplanes, when you have airplanes grounded, it's definitely a prophetic shadow of like leaders like losing their power, no longer being leaders. And so what's very interesting is that 737 number is connected to, on January 14th, Trump turned 73 years old and 7 months. Okay, so that 737 number. It was interesting too because on that date was when Jeopardy had their GOAT, greatest of all time, championship, and that was the final day of the championship. So that's interesting because there's a connection to kind of like the return of, like, the GOAT would be Obama, okay, and then Trump would be the ram, or the ram could be a picture of all of Israel because there's two horns, and like Netanyahu and Trump could be the horns of the ram, and then the goat comes and kind of knocks down the ram, so Obama and his people knock down the ram. Also we see the ram where, like, when Isaac gets sacrificed, or Abraham goes to sacrifice Isaac and instead they end up sacrificing a ram. So that's why Trump is the ram. And then, okay, so then what was interesting on January 14th is that was the day that there was a 777 dumping fuel in LA, and I have a picture of that. We'll talk about that. And then on January 15th was the impeachment, quote unquote, ceremony in Washington, which I already mentioned. Okay, so then, let's see. Oh, I don't want to go too fast. So let's see how these dates connect to the April dates. I didn't miss anything, did I? Okay. Um, so so on April 3rd, we had the the third death in 8 days at the Grand Canyon, and so we see a connection to this Grand Canyon rescue on January 2nd. And then on April 6th, so I highlighted 6. We always want to pay attention to that. That was when Obama had a speech in Berlin. Definitely very interesting. And then Netanyahu was going to annex the West Bank if he got elected. On April 9th, they had elections in Israel. Okay. Let's see, I'm not talking about how this connects to things. Let's see. So Netanyahu kind of talking about annexing the West Bank. He's being like Trump, you know. So it's interesting that happened on April 6th, because then on January 6th we had Berkowitz, discussing the peace plan. And then, on Three Kings Day, on April 9th was the elections in Israel, and then on April 10th, so what was kind of interesting is that we had the House voted to limit Trump with war on Iran on January 9th. So connection to, voting, you know. But what was very interesting was on April 10th, Netanyahu was announced the winner. And so that's very interesting, because then there's a connection to January 10th. And so I talk about in another slide how January 10th is like Yom Kippur. So I kind of think you don't want to be the winner. So there's a connection there. April 14th was Palm Sunday. And then April 15th was, okay, so do you remember this? That Notre Dame, that was the Notre Dame fire on April 15th. Okay, so now let's talk about, there was also a fire on the Temple Mount on that day, by the way. We'll talk really quickly about the Notre Dame connections. Notre Dame stands for Our Lady. And so if you understand that the Christians are the bride, and then Jesus and the Jewish people are the men. Well, Jesus is the groom, and then the Jewish people are the men. And then, so Our Lady would connect to Trump. And so it's very interesting that 9 months later was Trump's impeachment ceremony, and then, so in the fire at Notre Dame, we had the big spire fell. So that's a prophetic shadow. What also happened was there was a statue of Mary inside the church that Mary got knocked off her pedestal, and so I definitely thought that was prophetically significant. Okay, and then so then let's see. Let's talk about the rest of January up to this point. January 14th. I just repeated that. I guess I added that on January 14th, Pelosi said she was going to release her impeachment tomorrow, which was the 15th. And then January 18th was Mississippi River flooding in Illinois, Missouri. Okay, why was that significant? Okay, that happened on Tevet 21. What I think was significant about that is that we're being reminded about the great American solar eclipse that happened on August 21st. Because there's something like the epicenter, I can't remember the longest. There's something that happened in that area of Illinois and Missouri where it was like the longest time that you could see the solar eclipse, something like that. I don't remember exactly now, but there's definitely a connection. January 18th was also the Jerusalem Armenian Christmas Eve. January 19th was the Jerusalem Armenian Christmas. January 20th was 7th month. This is why I talk about January being the 7th month, because it's 7 months after Trump changed his mind on Iran. We almost went to war with Iran. Like, he had his finger on the trigger. I mean, we were that close. And then he was like, well, how many Iranians are going to get killed? And they said 150. And so then they said, no, let's not do it. I mean, we were so close. Okay. So bad decision. And then January 20th is 13 days after Tevet 10. Okay, I know. Okay. And then January 20th was also 9 months after Hitler's birthday. Let's see. So January 21st, which is today, is 9 months after Easter. It's 21 months after the Barbara Bush funeral. Definitely interesting. Barbara Bush, the funeral, and Trump wasn't really kind of invited to that one. That was the one funeral that he didn't go to. I kind of see this burning bush connection with Barbara Bush. So definitely all kind of interesting. So like January 21st, here Trump is, his impeachment trial is starting. I think because, he's been standing on holy ground, it's time for his sandals to come off, which God has started that with the impeachment trial. Okay. I mean, there's only so much you could do to Israel before God says, okay, that's enough. Okay. What's interesting about January 21st is it's 29 months after the Great American Solar Eclipse. So, so there's another connection to the Great American Solar Eclipse. Anyways, and then on today, so January 21st today, it's so interesting because Trump is 73 years, 7 months, 7 days. That's why I think this could be the start of his last day. A lot of things happen in the heavenly before we see him. I mean, there was definitely, when Obama was president, there was definitely a time where God said, you could kind of see where God said, you're done, Obama. And then that's when we saw Trump coming in as a candidate and stuff. So people might be president, but God has removed their anointing or removed their power. And so we saw when Trump became president, there was 77. He was 70 years old. And now I think, this is the day up in heaven where God kind of says, you're done. Okay. And so the connections to the stuff in April. So let's see. Okay, so April 17th. I guess I didn't see any connections to the January 17th, but that was when Kushner said he was going to release the peace plan in June. Let's see. I'm looking at my well, what was kind of interesting is maybe January 17th, the connection could be it's 1 month after Franklin Graham's warning. Let's see, they also started screening people at the airports for the deadly virus from China. There was 19 inches of snow on the 17th that caused the Lake Tahoe avalanche. So I mean, there could be things God's saying through that. April 18th was when the Mueller report was released, which was kind of interesting because at first we thought it meant, we were done hearing about the Democrats complaining about Trump and his Russia connection, but then, I don't know, it ended up not being all that great. Let's see. So we saw the start of Passover on April 19th, Good Friday, the full moon on April 19th. I think there's definitely a connection to the Jerusalem Armenian Christmas because, a picture connection to Jesus. Um, um, so let's see. It's kind of interesting. Okay, so like the Hitler birthday, this doesn't show up exactly. Oh, what's kind of interesting is on January 20th is, the third year, 3 years, the third year of Trump's inauguration. So kind of interesting that that shows up 9 months after Hitler's birthday. Because Hitler, I don't know, he's the first one who got a bunch of Jews killed. Okay, so is Hitler going to be this? Is there a connection with Trump and Hitler? Is Trump going to be the second one who gets a bunch of Jewish people killed? Okay, so what's really fascinating about that is, I just found out about this last night that they are planning to have the World Holocaust Forum in Israel on the 22nd and the 23rd. It's a 2-day affair. So all the world leaders, let me read this to you. 47 world leaders or senior diplomats are coming, including 26 presidents, 4 kings, and 4 prime ministers. Okay, so they're having a dinner Wednesday evening on the 22nd at Rivlin's house. President, Rivlin of Israel. And then on Thursday, they're all going to be at Yad Vashem, which is the Holocaust Museum in Israel, for the the big ceremony. Okay, so I thought that was kind of interesting. It's kind of interesting that that's coming 9 months after the birthday of Hitler. Okay, the 23rd, to me, what's interesting is the 23rd. Remember, I told you there's a connection with 23 to Obama, to the Antichrist. Daniel talks about the people of the prince who is to come will destroy the sanctuary. And so I'm really kind of waiting to see what's going to happen on the 23rd. It's 13 days. Okay, so originally I was counting 13 days. Okay, the reason why I'm looking at 13 days is that comes up in the book of Esther. Originally I was looking at 13 days after, what was it? Where did I calculate it? Yeah, right here. January 20th was 13 days after Tevet 10, after the Babylonian invasion or Iranian invasion. But really, I wonder if we want to be looking at 13 days after the Yom Kippur holiday of January 10th. And so that would be January 23rd. So we got to wait and see what happens. Okay, so last connection, let's see, January 21st was 9 months after Easter, 21 months after the Barbara Bush funeral. So that's kind of interesting because we see, okay, so the 21st, we also see a connection to 777 with this 21 number. Okay, so kind of interesting that it's 21 months after Barbara Bush, because Lamech, in the book of Genesis, he's like the father of Noah. He dies at 777. So I think he could be a picture of Trump because, well, I also think he could be a picture of, so all the days of Lamech were 777 years and he died. Okay, so then what happens after Lamech is he becomes the father of Noah. So definitely could be a picture of Trump. I think he also could be a picture of Netanyahu because when he became the father of Noah, he said, now he called his name Noah, saying, this one will give us rest from our work and from the toil of our hands, arising from the ground which the Lord has cursed. So this could be a picture of Netanyahu who's calling Trump Noah, who's not the real Noah. Okay, so just so you know. Okay, but anyway, so we see that 777. Okay, so I think we covered everything on that slide. Okay, so just quick overview of everything. January 2019, we saw lots of, okay, I saw lots of 21 showing up in January 2019. So there was definitely a focus on Tu B'Shavat, which was the New Year for trees in that month. On April, we saw the spire fell down at Notre Dame on April 15th. April 23rd was the fourth fall, the fourth death at the Grand Canyon. You know, so that connects to January 23rd. So we'll see what happens. See if there's a great fall that happens on January 23rd. You know, we're already seeing like the great fall of Trump, you know, because his impeachment trial, you know, started on January 15th. Okay, and then this January 2020, lots of 11s are showing up. Okay, like for example, on January 7th, we saw 11 people were injured, you know, when, okay, they didn't really talk about this in the news because, you know, Trump didn't really mention it, but 7 of our military men got, or I mean, 11 of our military men got injured when Iran dropped the missiles on the 2 bases. So what's interesting is we see kind of like a 7-11 connection on that date. You know, it was interesting that they bombed 2 U.S. bases, so we see kind of a connection to 9/11 with the 2 towers. Okay, what else we're seeing in January is lots of plane incidents. So planes falling, making emergency landings, crashing, things like that. So you want to pay attention to that because God can be giving us a sign of the towers are going to fall, the people in power are going to fall. Okay. What's very interesting too is we saw 4 earthquakes near, like they haven't had earthquakes for like a whole year or something. Then all of a sudden they had 4 earthquakes in 1 month near Ascension Island. So is that a connection to, are we going to see Jesus ascend? So like first, some of the earthquakes were happening north of Ascension. The one on 117 actually happened on the island. That was a 5.9 earthquake on January 17th. So kind of interesting. And then January 7th is 7 months after, okay, I already mentioned that, after Trump changed his mind on Iran. Okay, the 7th month on the Hebrew calendar is the month, okay, so let's get into this. The 7th month on the Hebrew calendar is the month of Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot. Okay, the 7th month on the Gregorian calendar, well, is July, and there's an expression, Christmas in July. Is that significant for this month? Okay, well, we definitely, even if Jesus doesn't come, there is a connection to Christmas. It's the last Christmas in, you know, in, you know, in January. And then, so if we're taking the dates on the Hebrew calendar, applying them to January, January 1st would be like Rosh Hashanah. Okay, so that, I've heard other people talk about this. I think I first heard about this from, what is her name? Renee Moses first came up with this idea of the Gregorian New Year. And there are these connections where, you know, like for Rosh Hashanah, you're blowing trumpets. Okay, for the New Year in America, we're blowing, you know, trumpets. We're celebrating, you know. So definitely some connections with Rosh Hashanah. On January, so then January 10th would be the Yom Kippur. Okay, so Yom Kippur, lots of connections with Yom Kippur. That is when God calls the Israelites to draw lots for scapegoats. Okay, so what happens is you have 2 scapegoats. One of them gets picked. Okay, you're drawing lots. One of them gets picked to get killed, to become a sacrifice. The other one gets picked to be released into the wilderness. Okay. What's interesting is there's see, God repeats his pattern. So in the first month of Nisan, on the 10th day, is when they pick the Passover lamb. So what's very interesting is on January 10th of this month, we had Solome's daughter. She she came and okay, so let me see. Let me first mention that this was 9 months after Netanyahu was the winner. Okay, so on April 10th, remember they announced that he was the winner? Okay, you don't want to be the winner. Okay, so what we have is if we have God picking his scapegoats, he's going to be picking one person to be killed and one person to be cast into the wilderness. Okay, well, if Netanyahu's the winner, does that mean he's the winner to be killed? I think so. And and so what's interesting is kind of like the Passover lamb gets picked on the 10th day, and then they kind of watch it until the 14th. They kill it on the 14th, but that didn't happen on January 14th. But I'm trying to see if there's anything that would kind of connect. We did see the Jeopardy goat thing on the 14th. We did see the 777 dumping the fuel in LA. We did see Pelosi releasing the impeachment, or saying she's going to release the impeachment to the Senate tomorrow. Let's see. Okay, so 14 days, though, from January 10th would be the 25th. No, the 24th of January. Anywho. Sorry, I can't make that work right now. So anyways, where was I? Okay. So talking about Yom Kippur, so we have the two scapegoats. I wanted to talk about, so there's this picture we see this picture in scripture of one picture would be like Jacob when he was blessing Joseph's sons, he like crossed his arms, and but then we also saw with Esau and Jacob, like Jacob stealing the birthright from Esau. So we see kind of this like crossover concept. And then there's a story in, when you're reading about the kings of Israel and the kings of Judah, the king of Israel and the king of Judah are going to fight against the same enemy. And what happens is the king of Israel, he goes in disguise it's just fascinating. He goes in disguise to battle, while the king of Israel goes in his royal robes. Okay, so when the enemies come to fight, they see the king of Judah and think he's the king of Israel because they really want to kill the king of Israel. Okay, but they see the king of Judah in his robes and they end up attacking him instead of the king of Israel. And so I definitely think we're seeing these are prophetic shadows of where, like, we have Iran right now probably really wants to kill Trump, but what they're going to end up doing is killing Israel instead. And they actually talked about that they were going to attack Israel, to kind of get back at Trump. So we see that crossover connection, okay? And then that was also the date that Solome's daughter, okay, I talk about that in another slide, so I'll wait and talk about that. So then what we have in this month is January 15th to the 21st would be a Sukkot. And then I just repeated what's going on. In the middle of the week was the Jerusalem Armenian Christmas Eve. Yeah, we already talked about all that stuff. Okay, so I wanted to talk about, okay, so in the middle of the week, we had this Jerusalem Armenian Christmas Eve. Okay, So I connected this to, and then on the 19th is the Jerusalem Armenian Christmas. Definitely, it's a connection to that April 19th full moon, January 19th. I put up the web page for the Armenian um 2020 Christmas in Jerusalem. Okay, so what you have is most of the Armenians celebrate their Christmas on it's let me see, where is it? January 6th is when most of them celebrate. But there is a Armenian church in Jerusalem um who they have chosen to celebrate their Christmas on January 18th and 19th. So 18th Christmas Eve and 19th is so this is the last Christmas. That's why it's fun to go to, Jerusalem to celebrate Christmas, because there's all these different we have they have the traditional Christmas on the 25th, and then you have the Orthodox Christmas on the 7th, and then you have the Armenian Christmas on the 18th, 19th. And then what's neat about these Armenians is they have a a big, it's like a parade from their church going down. Their church is in Jerusalem, and then they're going down to Bethlehem. So definitely very interesting. What was very interesting is that we saw on January 18th, um, um, is, so like if the April full moon is talking about a birthing, are we going to see the birth of the Messiah in January? What was interesting is that the royal family has been in the news like almost every single night. And what's interesting about the royal family is you have that same picture of Mary, Joseph, and the baby, because they have a baby boy. What was interesting was on the 18th, it was like they were out of the royal family, so no room in the inn for them, just a lot of connections. It's very interesting. And so then what I connected it to, I thought the Armenians did a great job of sharing the gospel, because they said, "For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life." Great gospel verse. Okay, so then I connected that to Matthew 24:14, where it says, "This gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in the whole world as a testimony to all the nations, and then the end will come." So I definitely think the Christmas season, and even the Hanukkah season was a good time of preaching the gospel. Obviously in Christmas we heard the good news about Jesus, being sent. In Hanukkah there's definitely a picture of the Maccabees or messianic type figures, Um, and so with this last Christmas, we could say that the gospel was being preached, and then the end will come. So that happened on January 18th. And so then I said 3 days after January 18th was January 21st. 3 days after January 21st is January 24th. Okay, important date. It'd be interesting to see what happens on that date. Okay, so let's see. I wanted to talk about okay. Let's see, I always repeat a lot of my stuff here. Okay. So on January 14th, we saw the what we saw was the 777 dumping the fuel in LA. Okay, so I drew a little picture here. This is what we saw in this, on the news, was this airplane, which is a 777 airplane, and you got the trail of fuel coming from both sides. And so can you see kind of a repeat of this pattern? I talked about the two people being on the two banks. But let me bring up these other verses here. So Ezekiel 17:3 says, "Thus says the Lord God, a great eagle with great wings, long pinions, and a full plumage of many colors came to Lebanon and took away the top of the cedar. And then in Revelation 12:14 we see, but the two wings of the great eagle were given to the woman so that she could fly into the wilderness to her place where she was nourished for a time and times and half a time from the presence of the serpent. And then in John 7:37, which we see with connected to Trump's birthday, or being 73 years and 7 months on the 14th, I guess, which is the day you kill the Passover lamb. Okay, so there we go. We found it. Okay, so that was Pelosi releasing her impeachment. Would be like killing the Passover lamb. And so John 7:37 says, now on the last day, the great day of the feast, Jesus stood and cried out, saying, if anyone is thirsty, let him come to me and drink. So what we see is like this picture of, especially when you look at the airplane, this idea of the Messiah and the Antichrist are waiting in the wings. Okay, so Trump's gonna be cut down because it's now 777. On the 21st today. And then we have the Messiah and the Antichrist waiting in the wings. And so the top of the cedar is going to be cut down. And what else was I going to say about that? Oh, I wanted to talk about, so what we have this time frame of time, times, and half a time. So we have the woman in Revelation 12, like she's in the wilderness for 60 days. Okay, so I think that's the time of 666. Okay, and then that brought us up to October, which was the start of the 3.5 months, I believe. Okay, and so then she was given, the two wings of the great eagle. Like the great eagle could be America, and then the two wings, one wing could be Messiah, the other wing could be the Antichrist. I mean, you could also kind of maybe see a connection to, like, two wings could be Iran and Turkey, but in this time frame of times, and half a time, I underline times because we have the 2 months where, the first month where Netanyahu was indicted, and then we had the second month where Trump was impeached. So, anyways, okay. Okay, so then January 2019, there was lots of 21 showing up, so we're going to focus on Tu B'Shvat. Okay, that's the new year for trees. Okay, I already talked about the 777. Okay, so I wanted to talk about, in Genesis 18, okay, this is talking about Abraham. It says, now the Lord appeared to him by the oaks of Mamre, while he was sitting at the tent door in the heat of the day. When he lifted up his eyes and looked, behold, 3 men were standing opposite him. And when he saw them, he ran from the tent door to meet them and bowed himself to the earth. And he said, my Lord, if I had now found favor in your sight, please do not pass your servant by. Please let a little water be brought, and wash your feet, and rest yourselves under the tree. And I will bring a piece of bread, that you may refresh yourselves. After that you may go on, since you have visited your servant. And they said, so do as you have said. So Abraham hurried into the tent to Sarah and said, quickly prepare 3 measures of fine flour, knead and make bread cakes. Abraham also ran to the herd and took a tender and choice calf and gave it to the servant, and he hurried to prepare it. He took curds and milk and the calf which he had prepared and placed it before them, and he was standing by them under the tree as they ate. Then they said to him, where is Sarah your wife? And he said, there in the tent. He said, I will surely return to you at this time next year, and behold, Sarah your wife will have a son. And Sarah was listening at the tent door, which was behind him. And then she goes on and laughs and all that stuff. And then God says, is anything too difficult for the Lord? At the appointed time I will return to you at this time next year, and Sarah will have a son. Then the men rose up from there and looked down toward Sodom, and Abraham was walking with them to send them off. Okay, a lot of prophetic shadows and pictures in here. I won't talk about them all of them, but I really want to talk about how we see a connection at Tu B'Shvat because he's by the oaks. Okay, so we see a connection to the new year for trees. Okay, and so how God made a promise that a year later, Abraham would have a son. And then, it was interesting that there was 3 angels that came to Abraham because only 2 angels went to Lot. So that was kind of interesting. So I see a connection to 3 Kings Day. We already talked a little bit about, this year on 3 Kings Day, we had Berkowitz in Israel with the 2 other guys. And then what's interesting is that we have Sarah making 3 bread cakes. Okay, that would connect to the 666, the 3 baskets of bread on the on the guy's head with Joseph in jail, on the baker's head. Okay, so just really quickly, and then it was interesting too that the men rose up from there. Okay, and looked towards Sodom. So we see a connection to the. Okay, so Sodom would be a picture of Israel, getting judged, because I think Israel's Sodom and then America is Gomorrah. Okay, so, let's see. Okay, so I put these all on one page so you can see them. And then it says, Daniel 7:25 says, he will speak out against the Most High and wear down the saints of the Highest One, and he will intend to make alterations in times and in law, and they will be given into his hands for a time, times, and half a time. I heard the man dressed in linen who was above the waters of the river as he raised his right hand and his left hand toward heaven, and swore by him who lives forever that it would be for a time, times, and half a time, and as soon as they finished shattering the power of the holy people, all these events will be completed. So what we're going to see is Israel shattered. Okay, and then Revelation 12:14, but the 2 wings of the great eagle were given to the woman so that she could fly into the wilderness to her place, where she was nourished for a time, times, and half a time from the presence of the serpent. So I put all the verses connected to that time frame all together right here. And I don't know if I mentioned that I thought it was dangerous that all the world leaders are going to be at the Holocaust Museum, because you got Israel, you got Iran is chomping at the bit, to, take revenge for the killing of Soleimani. Okay, and I just don't think it's really wise to put like all these world leaders in one spot, because I think it's dangerous. So, I think I put a verse in it. We'll talk about. There's a verse later on in here that talks about that. Okay, so let's see. What am I talking about here? Okay, so with Daniel, I think this is the 21-24 connection. In Daniel, he talks about mourning for 3 weeks. The Gabriel messianic figure was fighting with the Prince of Persia for 21 days. Cheswan 21 was November 19th. That would be a picture of the war started in Israel on November 19th. So Daniel sees a messianic figure on the 24th. So are we going to see the Messiah show up on the January 24th? That's a question. Okay, I'm always looking at 24 to see if something happens. What's interesting is in Haggai, it says, on the 24th of the 9th month in the 2nd year of Darius, the word of the Lord came to Haggai the prophet, saying, do consider from this day onward, from the 24th of the 9th month, from the day that the temple of the Lord was founded, consider, is the seed still in the barn, even including the vine, the fig tree, the pomegranate, and the olive tree? It has not borne fruit. Yet from this day on I will bless you. Then the word of the Lord came a second time to Haggai on the 24th of the month, saying, speak to Zerubbabel, governor of Judah, saying, I'm going to shake the heavens and the earth. On that day, declares the Lord of hosts, I will take you, Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, my servant, declares the Lord, and I will make you like a signet ring, for I have chosen you, declares the Lord of hosts. Okay, what I thought was interesting is, so the 24th of the 9th month definitely connects to Hanukkah. I already talked about, this connection with the 1335, with Hanukkah being blessed on Hanukkah. What's interesting too is that it talks about from the day when the temple of the Lord was founded. So that works for Hanukkah, the 24th of the ninth month on the Hebrew calendar. What's interesting is it also works for if January is the ninth month in the birthing process. That also works because the 24th of Tibet in January, which is today, the 21st, connects to, it'd be the first full day of the president's, the first day of their term, their presidential term. They get inaugurated on the 20th and their first term is on the 21st. So it's kind of interesting because it connects to both months. I thought that was interesting. And then what's interesting too is that earlier in Haggai, like I think it's Haggai 2:1, it talks about the 21st of the seventh month, and so, definitely interesting with these dates. And so what we're seeing is that we're seeing like a connection to two 24s. Okay, so maybe Hanukkah could be the first 24th. The second 24th could be today, January 21st, which is the 24th of Tibet. But then what does he say? He says, I'm going to shake the heavens and the earth. And then he's going to make Zerubbabel like a signet ring because he has chosen you. So we could be seeing like God is saying on this day, I'm going to shake the heavens and the earth, Trump's out, and then I'm going to bring in Zerubbabel, the Messiah figure. Okay, so then I wrote too, like Hanukkah night was December 22nd. Okay, so I listed all the different 24s because we have the Kislev 24, January 15th was also a 24th day. So if 24 is like a picture of Trump being out, that definitely happened on the 15th was the impeachment ceremony. Let me see if there's anything that happened on the 24th of Kislev. No, I didn't see anything happening on there. Except that it's the 1335th day after Trump declared that he was the nominee. So, that would be a picture of, like the end of Trump's term too. Let's see. And then January 21st today is an interesting day because you have both a 21 and a 24. And then we also have a 24 on January 24th. So interesting to see what happens. Also, we got two. Okay, right now, if you want to know if prophecy is being fulfilled, it is. We have the two in prison with Joseph. If Joseph is the messianic figure, Netanyahu's been indicted, Trump's been impeached. Okay, in this story, the third day is Pharaoh's birthday. So what's interesting is the Armenian Christmas Eve is the third day after the impeachment ceremony. Another 3 days leads us to January 21st. But then 3 days after the impeachment trial begins is January 24th. Okay, so 333. We see the 333 kind of repeated in that story with Joseph in the jail with the baker and the wine bearer. Okay, so I repeated this here. We also see this in Esther where, so a bunch of 3 days followed by 3 days, then the third day. So the Jews fast for 3 days, night or day. This is from the book of Esther. They fast for 3 days, night or day. Esther and maidens fast in the same way. And then the Esther goes to the king on the third day. Okay. And so what I wrote was like, you could do it this way, where the Jews fast 3 days and the day would have been Sukkot, the month of October. So they were probably all sad about, well, you have like Yom Kippur, which happened in October, is kind of like a 3-day fast. Because, God talks about fasting from the evenings to the evenings. I mean, if you added that they were probably upset about what was happening in, with the troops being removed from Syria, that would have added to their, that happened the day before Yom Kippur Eve, so that definitely would have made it a 3-day fast. Let's see here. Yeah. The 7th, 8th, and 9th. Okay. So then we have Esther and the Maidens fast. That could have been Trump's week in November where he was acting like Jeroboam and making a deal with Erdogan. And then we had Jews fast 3 days at night. So we could see that would be a picture of like Hanukkah, is because in Sukkot would be a daytime holiday because you shake the lulav in the morning, and then Hanukkah you light the lights at night. We did see a bunch of things. Let me think. That was Netanyahu. They had missiles at Israel. When on the 25th, on the third day when Netanyahu was escorted into the bomb shelter, that was also when we saw, the killing of the American contractor. So that would have been 3 days right there, the 25th, the 26th, the 27th. And then are we going to see a third day in January, where Esther goes to the king? Okay, we've already saw that in this month with Soleimani's daughter. That happened on the 13th, going to the Iranian leaders. Okay, and I'm going to talk about that in another slide. But is that going to happen twice in this month? Okay, so in John 7, he talks about the Feast of Booths. That would be October. Jesus goes up secretly. That happened in November, Trump's secret feast. And then in the midst of the feast, Jesus goes to the temple to teach and says, "Why do you seek to kill me?" That would be December because they're trying to impeach him. They're trying to get rid of him. And then the last day, the great day, Jesus says, "Is anyone thirsty?" Okay, so is that going to happen in January? Okay, so here's another verse. In 2 Kings 25:27, it says, okay, now it came about in the 37th year of the exile of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, in the 12th month, on the 27th day of the month, that evil Merodach, king of Babylon, successor to Nebuchadnezzar, in the year that he became king, released Jehoiakim, king of Judah, from prison. Okay, so Jehoiakim had his eyes cut out, and they threw him into prison. Okay, that's a picture of, like, you don't have prophets that are really seen accurately. You don't have the seers. And then, so what we saw was, like, so we see the 37th year, is that connected to the 73rd year of Trump? So it says in the 12th month, so the 12th month could be, like the last month. How we say the 12th hour is the end, so is this the 12th month? Because this is the end of what we've been waiting for. Okay, so the 27th of the month. It's interesting because Jeremiah 52 has this verse, the date listed as the 12th month and the 25th day. So there's a connection to Christmas in the Jeremiah verse. So January 24th is Tevet 27, but we also see another 27 on January 27th. So just like we saw the 24th repeated, we're seeing 27s repeated. So I think, every number has a connection, has a meaning. So 27 is about being set free. So it's interesting that the 24th of this month is also Tevet 27. So could someone be set free? Could Messiah be set free on January 24th? And then will we see the Jewish people resurrected on the 27th? I think we could be seeing the Jewish people attacked on the 23rd of January. And then we might see them resurrected on January 27th. Okay, so another pattern that's kind of matching is we saw Jesus's trial. That could connect to Trump's impeachment. And then there was Jesus's crucifixion. That could connect to Israel being attacked. Read Psalm 83 if you want to know more about that. And then we saw Jesus's resurrection on the third day. With resurrections, we read about resurrections being in order. So we'll see Jesus resurrected first, the Jewish people in Israel resurrected second, and the Christians in America, in a way, resurrected 3rd. Okay, so we also read about the around the crucifixion. It talks about the darkness from the 6th to the 9th hours. I had one idea here where October would be 6, November is 7, 8 is December, 9 is January, which is the 9th month, the time of birth. October is the time of 1260 days. October 8th was 1260 days after Trump declared himself the nominee. Also, October 16th is a 1260 official where Trump was the official presumptive nominee. Also, I wanted to talk about 1290 days. I got January 2nd, was when we killed Soleimani. There's a connection. 1290 days earlier was, okay, so it says from the time that the regular sacrifice is abolished and the abomination of desolation is set up, there will be 1290 days. Okay, there is, for Obama's term, there's a 1290 days that we'll have to talk about later. But it's already been fulfilled under Obama, but I believe in multiple fulfillments. But with Trump, when you talk about from the time that the regular sacrifice is abolished, so what I think that can connect to is that when God took the power away from Obama to kill his people, to make a mess of the world so that Christians and Jews got persecuted. So kind of when Obama lost his power, there's going to be 1290 days until the abomination of desolation is set up. And so what was interesting was that January 2nd, 2020 is 1290 days from June 21st, 2016. So you see that 21 number again there, which was when Ben Carson had a rally for Trump. And so this was kind of like the rally where the evangelicals kind of accepted Trump as a nominee, as the nominee. Like they had questions for him and stuff like that. So I think that can be really significant, that was maybe, when God considered, that, America said we want Trump as our nominee. The evangelicals said we wanted Trump as our nominee. And then 1290 days later, what does he do? He makes a mess. Okay, so, and I talk about Hanukkah being, we have kind of this picture of decreasing light. We see, in the book of John, it talks about John the Baptist, he must decrease so that, Jesus can increase. And so I think in this season of Hanukkah, we're seeing decreasing light where Trump's losing his light. And then we're seeing increasing light where, we're going to see the Messiah. And then just another, I figured this out this morning, now that I figured it out, it seems like, why didn't I figure this out before? But darkness, 6th to 9th hours. Okay, so the 6th king when Obama was president, the 7th king when Trump was president, then we have the 8th king is when Obama returns, and then the 9th king is Messiah. So it would be darkness, from Obama until the Messiah comes. Okay. Okay, so, the book of Esther. We have been fulfilling the book of Esther for a while now. Okay, and so just really quickly, I'll go over some of them so you can see how we're fulfilling prophecy. So Esther, in Esther 3:1, it says, after these events, King A promoted Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, and advanced him and established his authority over all the princes who were with him. Okay, so I think that connects to October 6 and 7 when President Trump promoted Erdogan. Okay, and then in Esther 3:2, it says, all the king's servants who were at the king's gate bowed down and paid homage to Haman, for so the king had commanded concerning him, but Mordecai neither bowed down nor paid homage. Okay, so Mordecai, who's not bowing down, could be either Israel or it also could have been the Kurds. Okay, so both of these people did not like Erdogan, okay, and weren't all that thrilled about what Trump did with Erdogan. Because then what happens is we see Haman disdained to lay hands on Mordecai alone, for they had told him who the people of Mordecai were. Therefore Haman sought to destroy all the Jews, the people of Mordecai, who were throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus. So Erdogan definitely wanted to get rid of all the Kurds, but also wants to get rid of Israel. Everybody wants to get rid of Israel. Well, Israel has a lot of enemies. Okay, so Esther 3:7, we see in the first month, which is the month Nisan, in the 12th year of King Ahasuerus, pure, that is, the lot was cast before Haman from day to day and from month to month until the 12th month, that is the month Adar. Letters were sent by couriers to all the king provinces to destroy, to kill, to annihilate all the Jews, both young and old, women and children, in one day, the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month Adar, and to seize their possessions and plunder. Okay, so the first month of pure was the Iran deal. So we saw fulfillment of the scripture where the 13th of Nisan was when President Trump signed the Iran deal, or whoever signed it. That happened on Nisan 13. So that was the first month it was set up. And then, so I believe the 12th month of pure was when Trump made this deal with Erdogan. So that was the fulfillment of that scripture. And so that these two deals are going to cause Israel to get killed. And then Esther 3:15, the couriers went out impelled by the king's command while the decree was issued at the citadel in Susa, and while the king and Haman sat down to drink, the city of Susa was in confusion. That happened on November 13th, when Trump was making his, meeting with, it was the craziest day. When Trump was meeting with Erdogan on November 13th, that was when the impeachment proceedings began. So it was just crazy. Really weird, bizarre. Okay. So then in Esther 4, we see when Mordecai learned all that had been done, he tore his clothes, put on sackcloth and ashes, and went out into the midst of the city and wailed loudly and bitterly. Then Esther's maidens and her eunuchs came and told her, and the queen writhed in great anguish. And she sent garments to clothe Mordecai that he might remove the sackcloth from him. But he did not accept them. Okay. So, this all happened at the Iran deal. That Netanyahu was very unhappy with the Iran deal. We did have Obama's, sent ships or military equipment or something to Netanyahu, to appease him for the Iran deal. But then this also happened after the Trump and Erdogan deal. Then, so what we could see maybe is that President Trump found out that, everybody was upset about the Erdogan deal. So then he said, okay, well, I'll make this announcement about recognizing the West Bank, to appease Israel, and I don't know, get kudos. So like giving a present, sending garments to clothe Mordecai. We definitely see, like, when it talks about, Mordecai also could be a picture of the Kurds who tore their clothes, put on sackcloth and ashes, and went out into the midst of the city and wailed loudly and bitterly. Definitely could be a picture of the Kurds. And then, okay, so then it goes on. Then Esther spoke to Hatak and ordered him to reply to Mordecai. All the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that for any man or woman who comes to the king to the inner court, who is not summoned, he has but one law, that he be put to death, unless the king holds out to him the golden scepter, that he may live. And I have not been summoned to come to the king for these 30 days. They related Esther's words to Mordecai. Then Mordecai told them to reply to Esther, do not imagine that you in the king's palace can escape any more than all the Jews. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place, and you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not attained royalty for such a time as this. Okay, so imagine like Netanyahu saying this stuff to Trump, or like Franklin Graham sort of saying this stuff to Trump. He didn't use those exact words, but we see this picture of, if you bless Israel, you'll be blessed. Okay, so if you have not been summoned to come to the king, then you're going to be put to death. Okay, so it says for these 30 days. So in 30 days, we could see a connection to the 666. Okay, was Trump summoned by God to do those three things that I call as 666? I would say no. So then the law is that he will be put to death. Okay. But another thing with the 30 days, it could also be the month of October when Trump went rogue. Okay, because those were like 30 bad days. Okay. And then what we saw in November, that in the month of November, we saw this being fulfilled in November because at least two people were talking about the danger of Iran. Kind of like trying to send a message to America like, hey, you better get involved in this fight with Iran because, don't think that you'll escape. That, you can just, that don't think that Iran's going to leave you alone. you know, so we saw that happen in November. On December 1st, we could also see a fulfillment of prophecy because Netanyahu and Trump are on the phone call to discuss Iran. So I'm sure Netanyahu was like, you better get involved. Iran's dangerous because, we definitely see Netanyahu saying that Iran is dangerous. So on December 17th, Franklin Graham warned that Judgment Day is looming. So we can't think that just because we're in America that we're not going to see judgment. Okay. So Esther 4:15-17. Then Esther told them to reply to Mordecai, go assemble all the Jews who are found in Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my maidens also will fast in the same way, and thus I will go into the king, and which is not according to the law, and if I perish, I perish. So Mordecai went away and did just as Esther had commanded him. Okay, so what I saw was, I already talked about a bunch of like 3-3-3s connections. But this was fascinating to me because we saw like fasting for 3 days. What happened was when Soleimani was killed, they declared a 3-day fast on January 4th, 5th, and 6th, and then they had the funeral for him on January 7th. Well, I thought that was interesting because I've been reading Revelation 11, and I always thought it was talking about Trump and Netanyahu, because this is where it talks about the two witnesses, and I think the two witnesses or the two martyrs are Trump and Netanyahu. And then it says when they finish their testimony, so that would be when the 60 days are over. The beast that comes up out of the abyss will make war with them and overcome them and kill them, and their dead bodies will lie in the street of the great city, which mystically is called Sodom and Egypt, where also their Lord was crucified. Sodom would be Israel, Egypt would be America. Those from the peoples and tribes and tongues and nations will look at their dead bodies for 3.5 days and will not permit their dead bodies to be laid in a tomb. And those who dwell on the earth will rejoice over them and celebrate, and they will send gifts to one another because these two prophets tormented those who dwell on the earth. Okay, what's fascinating about them is I think we saw fulfillment of these verses connected to Soleimani, because when Soleimani was killed, him and some other guy was killed, like the same day, okay? They paraded his body around for 3.5 days, okay? And then, so people were celebrating because he was a very nasty terrorist, okay? So we've already seen these 3 days fulfilled with Iran, but I think we're going to see the exact same thing or a similar thing happen with Israel, that we're going to see. I mean, I think we might see 3 fulfillments of this, so we saw this one with Soleimani, then we're going to see Netanyahu cut down, and then we're going to see Trump cut down, and then, the body. I mean, I think maybe with Netanyahu that there's going to be nuclear powers, nuclear something, so we wouldn't be able to bury his body. So we'll have to see what happens. Okay. So then in Esther 5, it says, now it came about on the 3rd day that Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the king's palace in front of the king's room, and the king was sitting on the royal throne in the throne room opposite the entrance to the palace. When the king saw Esther the queen standing in the court, she obtained favor in his sight, and the king extended to Esther the golden scepter which was in his hand. So Esther came near and touched the top of the scepter. Then the king said to her, what is troubling you, Queen Esther, and what is your request? Even to half of the kingdom it shall be given to you. Okay. So 3 days after Soleimani's funeral was January 10th, which was Yom Kippur. So it's interesting to me that we see Esther, the queen, going to the king on the third day. And so I think we saw a fulfillment of this with Salome's daughter, because she goes and she asks the Iranian leaders to avenge her father's death 3 days after the funeral. Okay, so that was on January 10th, Yom Kippur. I already talked about the Yom Kippur connections. Okay, so what's interesting is that it says the queen is given, she gets up to half the kingdom. Okay, so take God's people. You have Israel and America. And what God is saying is that I'm going to let you kill half of my people, but I won't let you kill the other half of them. We see that in the story of Jacob, where he divides up his wives because Esau is coming, and he's saying, well, if Esau kills the other, the first group of people, the other people, can escape and be okay. So we see this concept in scripture, where, God decides, God divided up his people and decides who's going to get killed and who's not going to get killed. Iran wants to kill America and Israel, but God said, no, you can only get half the kingdom. You can only get Israel. Okay. So, we see this also in Mark 6 with Herodias's daughter. Okay, the exact same thing. It's, this. Okay, let's read about this. Herodias had a grudge against John and wanted to put him to death, and could not do so, for Herod was afraid of John, knowing he was a righteous and holy man, and he kept him safe. And when he heard him, he was very perplexed, but he used to enjoy listening to him. A strategic day came when Herod, on his birthday, gave a banquet for his lords and military leaders and the leading men in Galilee. And when the daughter of Herodias herself came in and danced, she pleased Herod and his dinner guest. And the king said to the girl, ask me for whatever you want, and I will give it to you. And he swore to her, whatever you ask me, I will give it to you, up to half of my kingdom. And she went out and said to her mother, what shall I ask for? And she said, the head of John the Baptist. Immediately she came in a hurry to the king and asked, saying, I want you to give me at once the head of John the Baptist on a platter. And although the king was very sorry, yet because of his oaths and because of his dinner guest, he was unwilling to refuse her. Immediately the king sent an executioner and commanded him to bring back his head. And he went and had him beheaded in the prison, and brought his head on a platter and gave it to the girl, and the girl gave it to her mother. When the disciples heard about this, they came and took away his body and laid it in a tomb. Okay, so I think John is a picture of Trump. So what we have is like the Iran guy wants the head of Trump on a platter. Well, I mean, what we have is that, he's getting asked, the Iran leaders are getting asked by Salome's daughter to, give him Trump's head on a platter. And they don't really Iran doesn't really want to go to war with America because it's kind of dangerous. Now, it's interesting that it says Herod was afraid of John, knowing he was a righteous and holy man, and he kept him safe. Okay, well, so Trump is not, this is not talking about Trump here. I think this is talking about the fact that the reason why God is keeping America safe is that he's planning to have the Messiah come to America. And so that is who's being kept safe, is the Messiah, not Trump, in this part of the verse. Okay, but the rest of the John stuff connects to, Trump. Like a bunch of people want Trump's head on a platter. Oh, and we even saw that, oh my gosh, it even happens that that comedian, like, it's really funny, but she had that thing of Trump's head. Oh, it's terrible. Okay, so what we see in the story of Esther is there's 2 banquets of Esther, and then a gallows was built for Mordecai by Haman. But instead of the gallows, Mordecai was honored. Okay, so this is kind of fascinating because it's kind of like we're seeing this picture of like, Haman is like going into the king's, castle, saying, I want to hang Mordecai. And so I think what we're seeing is kind of this picture of, just when the Messiah is going to be honored is when we're going to see like Mordecai, or like the people of Mordecai killed on the gallows. Like it all happens all at once. The great flood where it's the the waters from below are released and the waters from heaven are released, all at the same time. Just a huge earthquake upset. Okay, so what's interesting is the first banquet. I think the first banquet of Esther relates to the story with Herodias' daughter. Okay, that's the first banquet. Okay, so we saw that happen on January 10th. And then we're going to see a second banquet of Esther, is going to be when Haman is exposed and Esther is pleading for the life of her people. Okay, so then Esther would be a picture of, like the American Christians, crying because of the Jewish people getting killed. And then we see Haman gets hung on the gallows in the story because he caused, he was going after the life of he was going after the Jewish people, trying to get him killed, trying to get Mordecai killed. Okay, what was interesting was they had a Mickey Mouse on the gallows in Iran at Soleimani's funeral. Thought that was kind of interesting. Okay, so we already talked about the two witnesses. But I highlighted this part because it's the cool ending. But after the 3.5 days, okay, so when Israel gets killed, you got to wait for the 3.5 days. But after the 3.5 days, the breath of life from God came into them, and they stood on their feet, and great fear fell upon those who were watching them. And they heard a loud voice from heaven saying to them, "Come up here." And they went up to heaven in the cloud, and their enemies watched them. Okay, just want to talk, if you don't really think it's the end of days, okay, look at Australia. Drought, major forest fires. Then on January 20th, they had a major dust storm and a huge hailstorm. We definitely see plagues. We are in the time of the plagues. Okay, in Puerto Rico, they had a hurricane. Now they're having nonstop earthquakes. Are we seeing like a judgment on islands? There's probably some kind of prophetic connection, which I'm not really aware of. Let's look at the nation of Somalia. They had drought, they had cholera, they had locusts, they had flooding. Okay, this is definitely last days stuff, people. If you don't believe it's the last days, you have not been paying attention. Okay, so then in America, last weekend we had Winter Storm Isaiah. I suggest you read Isaiah 9. I think that kind of connects, because that was the 9th winter storm. This past weekend we had Winter Storm Jacob. I was wondering if these verses in Isaiah would connect, because it'd be the 10th storm, so I got Isaiah 10. Just a few verses. Now in that day, the remnant of Israel and those of the house of Jacob who have escaped will never again rely on the one who struck them, which could be Trump, but will truly rely on the Lord, the true Messiah, the Holy One of Israel. A remnant will return, the remnant of Jacob, to the mighty God. For though your people or Israel may be like the sand of the sea, only a remnant within them will return. A destruction is determined, overflowing with righteousness. For a complete destruction, one that is decreed, the Lord God of hosts will execute in the midst of the whole land. Okay, okay, I have a lot in here. Just really quickly, connections to Exodus 7:8, which is what we're reading this week. The Jewish people are reading this week. The Nile turns to blood, could be October. The frogs connect to November because we saw Netanyahu indicted, lots of rockets shot at Israel, so enemies within, enemies without, those are the frogs. Okay, the dust of the earth becomes lice, that connects to December, Trump being impeached. What's interesting is that they say it is the finger of God, that could be connected to December 17th with the Franklin Graham warning. But Pharaoh's heart remains steadfast. That could be Trump, who doesn't think anything's going to happen, who thinks everything's fine, peace and safety. Okay, and then in January, we're going to see a mixture of noxious creatures, or they say swarm of flies in NESB. So that could be January, where we've seen Iran, we've seen other Islamic militants showing up. And then it talks about, so God separates on that day the land of Goshen. So that could relate to January 10th, where I said America was separated from Israel. We see this concept of the breach, being connected to Trump, causing a breach, causing the separation. And then in Exodus 8:19, it talks about redemption will come about tomorrow. And then they have a 3-day journey in the desert. That could be the 3 days of darkness. That could be the 3 days of Rachel weeping for her children, weeping, the American Christians weeping for the Jewish people in Israel. Exodus 9:4, we see a separation between the livestock of Israel and the livestock of Egypt. So what we're going to see is the Messiah come, and he, kind of puts a division with God's people. They get protected because now judgment's going to be coming to America. Okay, and then Exodus 9, we see a handful of furnace soot becomes dust and boils. Okay, turns into dust and boils. Okay, the furnace soot relates to the Holocaust. It turns into dust. Okay, so when Israel gets killed, Trump, the earth is going to be dry. And then we're going to see boils. People are going to get judged, for killing Israel. The people with 666 get boils. Okay, and then in 9:16 it says, I have allowed you to, okay, this is talking about Pharaoh. I have allowed you to stand in order to show you my strength and in order to declare my name over all the earth. So I think that, that's Pharaoh, God allowed Pharaoh to stand. I think that's a picture of Trump. Okay, so, same, here's this picture again with the Sea of Obama on one side, Sea of Trump on the other side, and then the dry land in the middle with Messiah, no lies. That's where you want to be. Okay, phew. Okay, that's a lot to cover. So, if you're not convinced that the Messiah is coming soon, you have not been paying attention. But it remains to be seen. So, like I said, I'm the partial prophet. I know in part and I prophesy in part. I don't know if I'm seeing accurately, but this is what I'm seeing. It seems like this pattern, this 3.5 month pattern, is like repeated all throughout Scripture. And it seems like we're fulfilling, a lot of prophecy is being fulfilled in these days. So I thank you for tuning in. I know that was long. That was a lot of information, but I wanted to get it all out to you because it's important. So thank you so much for tuning in. I really appreciate you. So God bless, and we'll catch you later.